Hello, everybody. Back at House Education on Wednesday, February 19th, 2025. As we've been doing, it is opportunity for an update to the work of the Commission on the Future of Public Education. An update not provided by me. Great. So just so everybody knows, the Commission met Monday. Its steering committee also met Monday. And that's kind of the status of things. Our next meeting is March. Well, it was going to be March 3rd. But March 3rd is also the night everybody has town meeting. So we'll get the update. Megan, I'm going to just turn it over to you to dig me out of this hole, please.
Sure. Thanks, Rep. Conlon. Hi, everyone. I'm Megan LaVoy, here as the chair of the Commission on the Future of Public Education. And so, again, just want to say thank you for kind of allowing us this opportunity to keep the legislature apprised of our work in real time. We did meet on Monday, and actually I'll update related to our next meeting at the end, because I do have an update about that time and location. So just, quick, the last time I was here, I let you know that the steering group would be recommending a path forward for the commission so that they could be as useful as possible to the legislature. Towards that end, the decision is that the commission will continue to engage in a high-level identification of policy considerations under each of the three areas that by now everyone is really familiar with: governance, finance, or funding, and quality. The commission will develop questions, considerations, and may have recommendations for the legislature. This also allows the commission to respond to active policy proposals as they arise, and still keep moving on the long-term charge. So that was the recommendation of the steering group to the commission for how to continue its work.
Megan, just want to clarify for folks who weren't part of the creation of the commission. A subgroup is the steering committee, and the steering committee is charged with setting the agenda for the commission, for the commission's work within the frame of the legislation that created it.
Yes, thank you. I forget that I am sort of picking up where I left off and not giving a lot of background information. So if anyone has questions, feel free. So that same steering group also acknowledged, and we talked about this the last time I was with you, that we're trying to be helpful for the legislature. It may also be helpful for the legislature if we as a body recommend revisions to our charge in order to support our work and also your work. At minimum, we think it's important to communicate how we intend to prioritize our work. We'll continue to maintain this cadence of reporting to the legislature after each meeting. And some of our work may result in issue briefs or similar communications up to and including recommendations. Our only deliverable required in the law is not until next year, but clearly it may benefit everyone to have more information. So I'm really here to summarize Monday's meeting. In keeping with our way of organizing, our agenda was to look through the lens of funding, one of those three areas. We had invited Dr. Colby, who has been in front of you and other committees, to share a similar presentation about foundation formula considerations. Our goal is to ground the discussion in an identified sort of best practice and information, and then discuss. At the last minute, Dr. Colby wasn't able to join us, but we still had a pretty significant conversation, and I would say really useful conversation. And I think it's important for this committee to be aware of the themes that grew out of it. So I'm here to summarize that conversation, and I'll close with sort of our next steps. I do think it's important to point out that Monday was a state holiday, so 9 members of the commission were present: myself, Jennifer Dex-Danielson, John Castle, Jay Nichols, Jeff Fannin, Elizabeth Jennings, Mike Licklider, Representative Conlon, and Oliver Olson for part of the meeting. So I'll start with considerations around the foundation formula. This, again, agenda topic was meant to surface questions, concerns, and considerations as you consider the merits of a transition to a foundation formula. Even though we did not have Dr. Colby with us, members did have access to her previous testimony and were able to sort of integrate what she shared as well as administration testimony and other information. And here are some of the themes. The first theme, and I should just say, my attempt, the commission didn't take action. My attempt here is to relay the conversation. So when I organize them in themes, these are things that came up from multiple commission members, not simply one. It's kind of how I've organized this. So there is concern about the sufficiency of the base amount that's included in the administration's proposal. So in considering the merits of a foundation formula, it's really clear that the most important question to answer before you know if it's a good idea is how much is that base amount? An inadequate base amount of funding doesn't provide the resources needed for schools to meet the needs of students. And I'm going to talk about that below because the conversation also turned to quality. So commission members just noted this proposal takes almost $200 million out of Vermont's education system. And they're pretty clear in their belief that this magnitude of reductions would impact students. They also talked about individual districts who are currently operating at or close to scale and historically spend at or below statewide average per pupil, likely due to that scale. They've modeled this new formula and would face significant reductions. So commission members questioned why we would contemplate a model where districts who are operating at preferred scale would be penalized. There was concern, sort of a theme around a concern about the sole reliance on the evidence-based model to derive the base in the administration's proposal. You heard from Dr. Colby, there are 3 methods for developing a base, and the most effective states triangulate those 3 methods before they set their base amount of funding. So if the legislature is considering the merits of a foundation formula, commission members suggest that you should utilize not only the evidence-based model cited by the agency's consultants, but also professional judgment panels and education cost functions. There was also pretty clear discussion around the idea that any foundation formula needs to include a mechanism for the formula to be adjusted in the future. Commission members noted that the foundation formulas are at risk of future decreases, especially during financially challenging times for states. So an inflator needs to be included in the formula to prevent further discussions. I know there may be questions. I'm going to just keep going through. Happy to answer questions at the end. Cost drivers. So commission members discussed that any proposal to adjust funding or governance really isn't going to result in change unless overall cost drivers are addressed. So instead, a reduction of education funding will simply impact students. Some cost drivers that are identified are familiar to you. Your committee has discussed and heard these as well: healthcare, facilities, tuition, mental health services, and others. So even though our conversation was framed around funding, it was really hard to separate that from the rest of the administration's proposal. And so there was conversation about the governance portion. Was there a question?
No.
No, that's me. Sorry.
I was throwing that up last week.
Okay. Yes, there's a lot of overlap, I'm sure, in discussion. Commission members noted it's really hard to adequately assess a funding model that's built on a governance structure that doesn't exist yet. So it prompted discussion about the governance proposal. And here's some of those themes. It is the opinion of folks on the commission that any change to governance, regardless of the number of districts, would need to occur prior to a funding formula shift. So the funding formula modeled in the administration's proposal is based on the 5-district structure. So it relies on the savings that occur in that structure. Commission members feel that decreasing funding before those changes to scale are made, or even simultaneously, would just result in decreased funding to students. I've sort of said this before, but it was a theme by itself. The savings reflected in the proposal are derived from a structure that doesn't exist yet. So commission members discussed the amount of upheaval and disruption to the system that would occur if the proposal were implemented, and whether or not that scale of change is worth the tax impact. Members were concerned about the upending of the system with little concrete information to suggest better quality. We'll talk about quality below because the commission did talk about that by itself. But again, whether or not the benefit is worth the impact. And the commission felt clearly there's a theme that the magnitude of change involved in this proposal requires more time and contemplation to determine the merits, and then even more time for implementation. Commission members shared their belief that the timeline proposed by the administration is insufficient. They noted that there's not sufficient capacity within the agency to support that magnitude of change. The commission talked about Act 173 as a pretty recent example of implementation challenges. That legislation really only addresses one component of our education system, and yet it's not fully realized even now, 7 years after passage. There was a theme in the commission's discussion around the choice component. They felt that it was impossible to separate the expansion of school choice in that plan from the discussion of the funding formula and governance structure. There was concern raised about this expansion taking more students out of the public education system at a time when schools are already experiencing enrollment decline. And the expansion of choice risks further destabilization of the public system. There remains significant equity concerns about who accesses school choice and who does not. So again, conversation continued, and the commission talks significantly about the quality component. There's discussion about the impact of the proposal on the quality of instruction provided to students. Members of the commission acknowledge that the administration states that they believe their proposal results in improved quality, but they really just talked about even if a massive governance shift occurred as proposed, it wouldn't necessarily change the delivery of education at the local level, and at least not right away. So commission members discussed their concern that the proposal would simply reduce funding with no guarantee of increased quality. Specifically, commission felt like any discussion of a foundation formula needs to be grounded in the extent to which it provides the resources necessary for a school to implement quality instructional practices. So this sort of ties back to the calculation of the base. The commission noted that the proposal as outlined doesn't rely on research about evidence-based instructional practices. If you look at the studies that are referenced in the report, they're focused on things related to funding and structure and staffing, not necessarily on instructional practices. Again, they use the example of Act 173, that law is designed to require schools to implement evidence-based MTSS practices. And in the current model, commission members feel like that would not be sufficiently funded in the current base calculation. And not just the base, but also with the weights. So it isn't just the base that they're discussing that. And again, that would just be another reason why professional judgment panels and the third method need to be part of developing the base. Members talked about the fact that school construction, that the current proposal doesn't address the facilities needs that are pretty well articulated in the legislature's own studies. Facilities needs are not only a cost driver, they're also connected to any change in delivery model that would occur as part of the plan. Several members of the commission shared examples of districts that really are contemplating the merging of smaller schools, but they can't make those changes without facilities renovations. Commission members believe that the basic infrastructure needs of our system can't be separated from a proposal. So you can sort of see from the themes of the conversation that it started to circle around the proposal as a whole. And several members of the commission asked whether or not the commission should consider taking a position as a body about the merits of the proposal, specifically a position against the proposal. The group ultimately determined that this was not something that should be done on Monday. Several members of the commission were missing, notably representatives of the administration, and commission members felt it was important to share this information, but not take a position. They understand that they could decide to take a position in the future, or they could continue to just discuss policy areas. But here are some of the pieces of the discussion related to that. The commission wasn't involved in the development of the administration's proposal. Members pointed out the administration developed and communicated this plan outside of the legislatively created commission that was actually created to do that, develop recommendations for changes to the system. The commission received the slides from the administration's proposal by email after the had already been delivered. So commission members maintain that they should have been involved in the development from the beginning, providing the kind of deep engagement that the legislature intended when it convened the commission. I know there's been conversations about, certainly members of the administration are on the commission. Don't think the commission is surprised at the topics in the plan, but it really was a plan developed outside the commission. Commission members talked about the rollout of the proposal lacks detail, making it difficult to adequately engage in responding to and providing feedback. So commission members voiced frustration with the rollout. They found it challenging to deliver on its duty to raise concerns, issues, and pose alternatives. Members talked about feeling a little bit stuck. They're unsure whether they should be providing alternatives, whether they should be waiting for details to react to. And this parallel track is really not productive. And it certainly isn't representative of the collaboration that the administration talks about. I think there was, concern raised there about the fact that the commission hasn't been able to do its job well is very much connected to how the administration chose to present this proposal. And finally, a theme from members of the commission is that the message that's stated and implied in the administration's proposal, that Vermont needs a complete rebuild of the entire system, serves to further degrade that public education system. So commission members voiced significant concerns about messaging that faults Vermont educators, leaders, school boards, and communities for the challenges that we face. Thoughtful questions are described as defending the status quo, and those who ask those questions are described as misinformed. And this really further erodes the public education system in the minds of the commission. So there's a lot in those themes. I'm going to keep going. I will happily answer questions. But it was important for the commission to make sure that that sort of the summary of their conversation was shared. So next steps, sort of what the commission is doing in the immediate at its next couple of meetings, which, to answer Rep. Conlon's question, March 3rd will be their next meeting. It will be at Lamoille South at People's Academy. They had already agreed to host for quite a while. Commission did have a conversation about, it is unfortunate that it falls on the same day as many not just school, some town meetings and many school annual meetings. But our hosts weren't able to change the date at such a late notice. So we will meet on March 3rd and we'll have our next virtual meeting on March 17th. So the commission will continue to analyze policy considerations and recommendations, working within those three areas. Given that the first policy area in the law and a lot of what I just shared today is around governance, that's likely what our next meeting will focus on. And we talked about this question of, to what extent does the creation of scale through governance consolidation result in increased opportunity and improved instruction for students? And also, to what extent does it bend the cost curve? We also talked about, what are we trying to achieve with changes to governance? Is it just financial gain? Is it quality? And then what in our current structures are getting in the way? In other words, what are the things that need to be addressed related to governance because they get in the way of those two things? We will also, as a commission, engage in a discussion about revisions to our charge. And here is a question for you as a committee and others in the legislature. I said earlier that we would like to be able to propose recommendations about a revised charge to you, but we welcome any insight you have for us to inform that conversation. We would welcome specific questions or concrete things that you would like us to work on. We would be happy to attempt to make that happen. And then the commission will continue on its path towards community engagement. This is a piece that we have been really looking forward to doing. So Afton Partners, which is the communication and engagement consultant that we are working with, they will work with our subcommittee to propose a revised engagement plan that will target the groups identified in the law, but also think more broadly about who else should be at the table providing input. And likely those opportunities will vary. Focus groups, individual engagement, open, forums, things like that. and they will present a draft revised plan to the commission on March 17th. So I realize I shared a lot. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Megan. And again, for your continued hard work on even just putting together this review of the commission meeting is important and helpful. And I would say that we were previous before lunch having a large discussion, and you bring up some great questions that we also need to ask ourselves about governance. And so if nothing else, those are going to be quite helpful to us as well. Committee members, do you have questions? All right, so just a reminder that the commission was created in the yield bill last year at a time when we didn't have the leadership in place at the AOE in a solid fashion. We gave them a charge that is sort of bouncing back on us in a sense that we're also at the same time trying to meet a lot of those same obligations. But I think one of the important things that the commission does have is some real strong stakeholder engagement requirements, and it is setting up a design to make that happen with the help from the consulting group that we've been able to engage. And I think that's important as we talk about these really big issues. Any other questions? Yes, Representative Brady.
On that note about stakeholder engagement process, we had a presentation last week from Jay Badams talking through a redistricting process he'd been in that included, I think, things many of us were excited about, most specifically maps and really detailed maps. But Rep. Brown has reminded us a few times also using those maps in public engagement processes. So I'm not sure you can answer it today, but I would be curious or potentially would want us to maybe talk with the consultant that you're going to be using. If we are going to actualize some of this map-based thinking and decision-making, is this a forum to do that outside of just the State House?
Yeah, well, the way I would answer that is first, one of the reasons that the commission engaged with Afton is because of their ability to be really responsive and iterative in what they're developing. So in some ways, their planning methods of engaging and the question of what they want to hear about is likely to change. And then that also points to who they're asking and how will change. So they are also a group that is really familiar with the idea that different geographic regions related to a map need and want to engage differently. And so they're excited to be able to work with us on that. I think to the second part of your question, whether or not they can be part of the engagement in reacting to a new map or just reacting to policy things, that is part of what we've asked them to be prepared to do. So right now they are designing the how. The what of what we need to do is something that they are willing to be pretty responsive to. So if there is, for example, if there are additional policy proposals or considerations or drafts, that can be the body of the commission and its engagement infrastructure could be used for input. I think that's what you're asking.
If it wasn't, it was a great answer. Yeah, Representative Taylor.
Was there any parts of the governor's proposal that the commission agreed with and things could move forward?
I think the commission recognizes that governance changes and possible changes to the foundation, to the formula, in other words, how we fund it, are part of, and quality, are part of the solution. So at a high level, the idea of what does governance need to look like? What does funding need to look like? All in service of quality. So I don't know that that's necessarily a part of the plan, but But I don't think the commission, I would say there's members of the commission that have solutions for those things that are completely outside of the plan. But as a body, I think there's recognition that those high level areas are the right ones. I would also say that the conversation about the foundation formula is simply about how you go about it and how you transition to it. So it isn't necessarily saying it's not a good idea, at least as a body. Doesn't mean that individual members don't think that, but as a body, it is more about, if you're going in this direction, here's what you need to consider.
Right. Thank you very much, Megan, and we'll see you soon.
Okay, thanks a lot.